For this project, I'm using my favorite Fabriano Artistico 140-pound cold-pressed watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton, which means it'll take the water and the paint really easily and really well, and you won't have to worry about the paper disintegrating or buckling under all of the water and paint. My paints are a Sennelier set of 48 colors. It's a pan set of paints. It's a little bit over the top. You really honestly won't even need this many colors. I like the selection of yellows in this set, so that's why I chose it for today's project. You really just need a warm yellow and a slightly cooler yellow. For my brushes, I'm using 2 of my handmade bamboo handle Lebenson brushes, and of course I'll leave a list in the description with all of the supplies used in this project. Other supplies you'll need are a water jar, a spray bottle for activating your paints, some paper towel for blotting, and of course a pencil for doing your sketch. To start the sketch, I just put a little tick mark at the bottom and at the top of my paper. This is to indicate how tall or how high the banana is going to be on the paper. Once you've decided on those outside dimensions, then you can go in and make an arc shape, trying to mimic the exact curve that you see in the reference photo of that banana. Sketch lightly so that you can erase any marks if you make mistakes. Next, I'm adding a little dot. It's about in the center of the banana, slightly higher, for that left banana peel. And then I'm going to make a nice curved line connecting that peel all the way to the base of the banana. In one careful swooping motion, I'm just trying to match the shape of that arc. It doesn't have to be perfect. Remember that if it looks a little different from the reference photo, that's totally okay. Next, I'm marking the center point of the banana where the peel separates from the inside of the banana itself. There's a slight shadow shape here. You want to indicate any important shapes or lines that will be changing colors and values throughout your painting. Erase any unnecessary marks as you work. And then I'm connecting the top of the banana all the way to the center that I've already drawn on. Try to make the line connect so that it doesn't look disjointed anywhere. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I made that mark for the right side of the peel just a little too high, so I'll have to erase that. For now, I'm checking my angles, and I'm bringing up this peel on the right side at a slight angle lower than the left side, and then creating the curve shape where it comes down. Look for the shape in the shadow and try to match that with your drawing before drawing the peel. And again, erase any unnecessary pencil marks. You don't want those to show up underneath your paint. For the back side, I want to just check that it's a little bit higher than the left side of the peel, and I make a nice big tall arch for the peel in the back, and then a little hint of it just behind the banana. We are all ready to start painting. The first color I'm going to be starting with is this Indian yellow. It's this warm yellow. If you have Holbein Gamboge Nova, that might be a little bit similar. And I'm spraying the paints to activate them to make them nice and wet and ready to go. I'm swirling my brush around in the clean water, and I'm going to start with the wet and wet technique inside the bright yellow portion of the banana. For this, I just take the clean water on my brush, and really I'm just painting with the water inside of my pencil lines. You'll want to be careful to stay inside of your pencil marks, because wherever your water goes, the paint will flow. I'm painting right up to the inside of the banana. I don't want this bright yellow to overlap any of the areas that are going to be more white or off-white and lighter in value. Right now, just focus on the bright yellow portion. You'll want your paper to be glossy wet. It's okay if there's a little bit of puddling here. Just remember that the more pooling you have, the less control you have. Now I'm dipping directly into that Indian yellow, and with the darkest value on my brush, painting right underneath that overlapping peel. This is the darkest yellow, and it's going to be creating this shadow shape on that right side of the banana. And you can see there's a clear separation where there's this darker value that merges into a more of a mid-tone and then a highlight on the left side. So that's what we're going to try to portray with this little painting. I'm filling in this little archway, another bright yellow portion of the banana peel. And while the paper is still wet, it's really easy to just pull and push the paint and manipulate it. And as you pull it into the wet areas and the paint starts to wear off your brush, it'll naturally get lighter in value. This other yellow I'm dipping into now is a primary yellow. It's a Sennelier primary yellow, it's called. And it's just a little more neutral, a little less orangey. And as I work my way towards the left side of the composition, the yellow gets a little less intense and more primary in its color. I'm pulling that light yellow up into the left side, and then on the underside of this peel, I'm using more of that dark Indian yellow. Anywhere you see little blots of darker color, you can add that in, but for now, this is a really good first layer. I'm applying a little of that Indian yellow along the edge of the peel and on the little portion of the peel that's just barely showing in the back of the composition, and sort of outlining this white shape on the right side. I'm going to rinse that out almost all the way. There's still some paint in my brush, and I'm blotting any excess water on the paper towel. And then with that watered down yellow on my brush, I'm going to rinse it out just a little more. I'm going to paint this really light yellow in the inner portion of the banana, the edible portion. It's a much lighter value than the peel itself. I want it to just look a little bit off-white, just barely tinted. So there's much more water than paint in my brush right now. And same for the inner portion of the peel. It's just a very, very light yellow, mostly water. And I'm only utilizing just a little bit of paint that was left in my brush. Dipping back into the palette as necessary if I want to go a little bit darker in certain portions. Within these white shapes in the peel, there are little slivers of darker yellow. Don't overdo it with those details, just suggest them for now, wet and wet. Now this color here is called Venetian red, and it's a almost brownish red. I'm using this to paint the shadow even more intensely underneath the banana. Now what just happened there? The paper was still really wet, so that red paint that I just put down bled right into the white portion of the peel. This is an easy mistake to make when you're working wet and wet, and it's also easy to fix. Just lift it right back out with a damp, thirsty brush. Grabbing a little bit more of that and using that same Venetian red color under the back side of the peel. It might look a little shocking at first how vibrant this is, but you can see that it really does make sense within the overall colors of the banana. And remember, when you mix red and yellow, you get orange, and that is the color that we're reading when we look at our reference photo inside of those shadows. I'm pushing and pulling the paint around within that wet area just to smooth it out and lift some of the paint back out. I feel like the red got maybe a little too dark. I'm dipping in the water to loosen up the paint on my brush and grabbing some more of that Venetian red for the left side of the banana peel. We're really just pumping up the values in our shadow shapes right now, making them more intense, rich and vibrant, and dark in color. Now here in the center, I'm laying down a little line of that Venetian red, and you can see it's bleeding all over the place on my wet paper. So you can see even an artist who's quite experienced in watercolor can still make these mistakes with wet and wet. And I've gotten quite comfortable working in wet and wet, but I still will sometimes misjudge the timing. And so I had to scoop that right back out with a thirsty brush again. I'm actually using that red to my advantage a little bit, pulling and pushing it to create a nice little tint on that left side of the peel. And then scooping some of that paint back out on the right side where it bled a little bit too much. If mistakes happen, don't give in to the idea or the myth that watercolor mistakes can't be fixed, because they can. You can just, especially while it's still wet, scoop the paint back out with a thirsty brush. Now I'm actually grabbing a little bit of blue. This is cerulean blue. Mixing it up in my palette ahead of time with a little bit of water, and I'm adding a slight tint of blue to the right side of the banana, helping it stand out against the background a little bit, and also putting a cool shadow on that side. I'm going to do the same thing in the center, bringing it all the way up to the top. and rather outlining the top of it. You don't see this color too much in the reference photo, so I'm definitely exaggerating it a little bit in my painting. But that's the beauty of painting, right? It doesn't have to be an exact copy of a photo. You can make it even more exaggerated, more colorful, pump up your values, pump up your colors, and it's going to look even more powerful than a photo. Here at the base of the banana, I'm overlapping the blue on top of the yellow, and we get the effect of green. And then I'm swiping my brush in the center point and just alongside of some of those ridges. Here inside of the banana itself, you see these tiny little horizontal lines indicating the texture of the banana itself. Work very lightly and delicately if you decide to add these details in, and make sure you're using a brush that comes to a nice tiny tip. You can just lay down those little brush strokes with a very slightly tinted wash, side by side in a parallel motion, using short, quick brush strokes. They don't have to be exactly like the reference photo. You just want to get the essence here. And be very careful not to work with too dark of a value on these little details, or it will overpower the effect of the white banana. I'm grabbing a little bit more of my Indian yellow, and now that it's all begun to dry quite a bit, I can touch up some areas and add more details as needed. Oftentimes you'll need to darken certain areas. They may have looked dark enough in the initial wash, but remember that watercolor dries lighter. So don't be surprised if you have to go back in and add another layer just to darken up certain sections. So here in the shadow shape, I'm adding another layer of Venetian red to really make that shadow even darker, so that that peel that's curving over the top really feels like it's coming toward the viewer. You can dab a little bit along that edge to smooth and soften it while the paint is still wet. I'm adding another layer of that Venetian red over the little bit of peel that's visible in the back of the composition. Work very carefully here. Try to stay within your lines. And you can add a few little details within the peel itself, a couple little lines, adding texture and visual interest. Notice how I'm moving my brush, curving it in the direction that the peel is curving. And then I'm taking a wash of water and just going over the banana portion again, just to kind of smooth out all those little details a little bit. Now I'm reaching for some Payne's gray or black, whatever you have that's the darkest color on your palette. Use that for the very tip of the banana. There's a little portion on the left side of the tip here that's not completely black, it's more of a reddish color. Really quick, I'm painting a dark shadow on the underside, removing that paint, and then grabbing some more of my Venetian red and filling in the left side. It's barely visible that there's a color change there, but once it dries, it'll be a little bit more obvious. You can use tiny little brush strokes, slightly more watered down, to darken up some of the ridges and shapes at the base of the banana. I'm getting a little bit picky here, but sometimes it's these little final details that can really pull the composition together and help it pop. So if you're not perfectly satisfied with your painting, don't give up on it. Take it to the next step. You might be concerned about overworking, but just remember, as long as you're letting everything dry completely, you don't have to worry about disturbing the layers underneath. And be conservative with your values, working gradually and slowly without going too dark too soon. You can see I'm adding a little bit more pops of primary yellow here and there, and it's really helping the colors stand out even more. And then I'm adding a stronger striation in the banana using that Indian yellow. The last effect is the background. Now, of course, on the color wheel, yellow is the opposite color of purple. And those two colors we would call complementary colors because they are complete opposites of each other And in nature, you often see fields of flowers where you have yellow flowers and purple flowers together, and it looks absolutely spectacular. So I'm going to choose purple for my background as a complementary color right against that yellow, and it's really going to make that yellow pop even more. I'm using the wet and wet technique, just painting clean water all around the banana. This is going to help the paint really soften and flow in fun shapes and fun ways. You'll notice that I'm being careful not to touch my brush right up on that black that I just put down. It's still a little too soon to touch that with water, otherwise it will bleed out, so be careful around your darkest colors. Now I'm grabbing some purple, a generous amount loaded on my brush, and just dabbing on the paper. I'm a little more careful to outline around the banana itself so that I can catch those highlights along the peel and just really help the shape stand out. You want to make sure that you don't lose the integrity of your drawing with any of these background colors. So slow down around those edges. But then as you work away from the banana, you can be more free and have a lot of fun with your brush strokes. Mix it up, change the direction that you're moving your brush, flatten it out to get broader brush strokes, and you can even rake your brush across the paper in the dry areas to create some really interesting dry brush effects. What happens is that your brush will miss little areas in the paper, the little divots, causing the texture to really stand out, and it looks so lovely. I love this combination of wet and wet and wet and dry on a background. It's something that you can only do with watercolor, and that makes it even more beautiful and unique. This purple I'm using, by the way, is called Cobalt Violet Light Hue. It's not a true purple. It's got a little bit more magenta in it, but I absolutely love it. Working a little slowly and more carefully around the edges again, and then moving my brush quickly and trying to create pleasing shapes all around the banana. I add a little bit more water in if the paper begins to dry out slightly. I still want the paint to look like it's just flowing and moving. I want the banana to have just a wonderful whimsical feel to it, and the background really helps lend to that overall look. You may have to adjust your grip on the brush or how you approach the painting depending on what edge you're trying to paint around, so really take your time with that. Now the very last thing I'm going to do is add a shadow underneath the banana. So I'm taking some Payne's Gray, mixing it up on my palette ahead of time with a little bit of water so it's not super dark. And if that's a little too light, you can dip in your palette again and grab some more paint directly out. And I'm just carefully painting a little shadow right underneath. All of this is to create the effect of the banana popping off the page. We want it to really look 3D, and shadows really help with that. Now to create a soft edge, you can remove some of the paint from your brush and then swipe along that edge that you just laid down with a little bit of water still in your brush. And you can see it softens out beautifully. Darken the shadow as needed. If you feel like it needs a little bit more, just glob in some more paint, wet and wet, and watch it soften and diffuse naturally on the paper. This is why having cotton watercolor paper is so essential. If you're trying this project with a cellulose-based paper or something that's a little bit cheaper, it's probably not going to work the same. You may still get some really beautiful effects, but just be careful that you don't use too much water on your wood-based paper or it may start to disintegrate. So just watch for that. Well, there is our finished banana. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I had so much fun playing around with these bright colors. Let me know in the comments what you think and if you'd like to see more fruit tutorials. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.